Lexiai reads Brexit Political Declaration. Produced by Lex Veritas.
Political declaration setting out the framework for the future relationship between the European Union and the United Kingdom.
Introduction.
In 1. The European Union, hereafter referred to as the Union, and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, hereafter referred to as the United Kingdom, the parties have agreed this political declaration on their future relationship, on the basis that Article 52 of the Treaty on European Union (TEU) provides for the negotiation of an agreement setting out the arrangements for the withdrawal of a departing member state, taking account of the framework for its future relationship with the Union. In that context, this declaration accompanies the withdrawal agreement that has been endorsed by the parties, subject to ratification. 2. The Union and United Kingdom are determined to work together to safeguard the rules-based international order, the rule of law and promotion of democracy, and high standards of free and fair trade and workers' rights, consumer and environmental protection, and cooperation against internal and external threats to their values and interests. 3. In that spirit, this declaration establishes the parameters of an ambitious, broad, deep and flexible partnership across trade and economic cooperation, law enforcement and criminal justice, foreign policy, security, and defense and wider areas of cooperation, where the parties consider it to be in their mutual interest during the negotiations. The future relationship may encompass areas of cooperation beyond those described in this political declaration. This relationship will be rooted in the values and interests that the Union and the United Kingdom share. These arise from their geography, history, and ideals anchored in their common European heritage. The Union and the United Kingdom agree that prosperity and security are enhanced by embracing free and fair trade, defending individual rights and the rule of law, protecting workers, consumers and the environment, and standing together against threats to rights and values from without or within. 4. The future relationship will be based on a balance of rights and obligations, taking into account the principles of each party. This balance must ensure the autonomy of the Union's decision-making and be consistent with the Union's principles, in particular with respect to the integrity of the single market and the customs union and the indivisibility of the four freedoms. It must also ensure the sovereignty of the United Kingdom and the protection of its internal market, while respecting the result of the 2016 referendum, including with regard to the development of its independent trade policy and the ending of free movement of people between the Union and the United Kingdom. 5. The period of the United Kingdom's membership of the Union has resulted in a high level of integration between the Union's and the United Kingdom's economies, and an interwoven past and future of the Union's and the United Kingdom's people and priorities. The future relationship will inevitably need to take account of this unique context. While it cannot amount to the rights or obligations of membership, the parties are agreed that the future relationship should be approached with high ambition with regard to its scope and depth, and recognize that this might evolve over time. Above all, it should be a relationship that will work in the interests of citizens of the Union and the United Kingdom, now and in the future.
Part 1. Initial Provisions. 1. Basis for Cooperation. A. Core Values and Rights.
6. The parties agree that the future relationship should be underpinned by shared values such as the respect for and safeguarding of human rights and fundamental freedoms, democratic principles, the rule of law and support for non-proliferation. The parties agree that these values are an essential prerequisite for the cooperation envisaged in this framework. The parties also reaffirm their commitment to promoting effective multilateralism. 7. The future relationship should incorporate the United Kingdom's continued commitment to respect the framework of the European Convention on Human Rights, ECHR, while the Union and its member states will remain bound by the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, which reaffirms the rights as they result in particular from the ECHR.
B. Data protection.
8. In view of the importance of data flows and exchanges across the future relationship, the parties are committed to ensuring a high level of personal data protection to facilitate such flows between them. 9. The Union's data protection rules provide for a framework allowing the European Commission to recognize a third country's data protection standards as providing an adequate level of protection, thereby facilitating transfers of personal data to that third country. On the basis of this framework, the European Commission will start the assessments with respect to the United Kingdom as soon as possible after the United Kingdom's withdrawal, endeavoring to adopt decisions by the end of 2020, if the applicable conditions are met. Noting that the United Kingdom will be establishing its own international transfer regime, the United Kingdom will in the same time frame take steps to ensure the comparable facilitation of transfers of personal data to the Union, if the applicable conditions are met. The future relationship will not affect the parties' autonomy over their respective personal data protection rules.
2. Areas of shared interest. A. Participation in Union programs.
11. Noting the intended breadth and depth of the future relationship, and the close bond between their citizens, the parties will establish general principles, terms and conditions for the United Kingdom's participation in Union programs, subject to the conditions set out in the corresponding Union instruments, in areas such as science and innovation, youth, culture and education, overseas development and external action, defense capabilities, civil protection and space. These should include a fair and appropriate financial contribution, provisions allowing for sound financial management by both parties, fair treatment of participants, and management and consultation appropriate to the nature of the cooperation between the parties. 12. The parties will also explore the participation of the United Kingdom to the European Research Infrastructure Consortiums, ERICs, subject to the conditions of the Union legal instruments and individual ERIC statutes, and taking into account the level of participation of the United Kingdom in Union programs on science and innovation. 13. The parties recall their shared commitment to delivering a future Peace Plus program, to sustain work on reconciliation and a shared future in Northern Ireland, maintaining the current funding proportions for the future program.
B. Dialogues.
14. The parties should engage in dialogue and exchanges in areas of shared interest, with a view to identifying opportunities to cooperate, share best practice and expertise, and act together, including in areas such as culture, education, science, and innovation. In these areas, the parties recognize the importance of mobility and temporary movement of objects and equipment in enabling cooperation. The parties will also explore ongoing cooperation between culture and education-related groups. 15. In addition, the parties note the United Kingdom's intention to explore options for a future relationship with the European Investment Bank (EIB) Group.
Part 2. Economic Partnership. 1. Objectives and Principles.
16. The parties recognize that they have a particularly important trading and investment relationship, reflecting more than 45 years of economic integration during the United Kingdom's membership of the Union, the sizes of the two economies and their geographic proximity, which have led to complex and integrated supply chains. 17. Against this backdrop, the parties agree to develop an ambitious, wide-ranging and balanced economic partnership. This partnership will be comprehensive, encompassing a free trade area as well as wider sectoral cooperation, where it is in the mutual interest of both parties. It will be underpinned by provisions ensuring a level playing field for open and fair competition, as set out in Section 14 of this part. It should facilitate trade and investment between the parties to the extent possible, while respecting the integrity of the Union's single market and the customs union as well as the United Kingdom's internal market, and recognizing the development of an independent trade policy by the United Kingdom beyond this economic partnership. 18. The parties will retain their autonomy and the ability to regulate economic activity according to the levels of protection each deems appropriate, in order to achieve legitimate public policy objectives such as public health, animal health and welfare, social services, public education, safety, the environment including climate change, public morals, social or consumer protection, privacy and data protection, and promotion and protection of cultural diversity. The economic partnership will recognize that sustainable development is an overarching objective of the parties. The economic partnership will also provide for appropriate general exceptions, including in relation to security. 19. The parties recall their determination to replace the backstop solution on Northern Ireland by a subsequent agreement that establishes alternative arrangements for ensuring the absence of a hard border on the island of Ireland on a permanent footing.
2. Goods. A. Objectives and principles.
20. The parties envisage having a trading relationship on goods that is as close as possible, with a view to facilitating the ease of legitimate trade. 21. These arrangements will take account of the fact that following the United Kingdom's withdrawal from the Union, the parties will form separate markets and distinct legal orders. Moving goods across borders can pose risks to the integrity and proper functioning of these markets, which are managed through customs procedures and checks. 22. However, with a view to facilitating the movement of goods across borders, the parties envisage comprehensive arrangements that will create a free trade area, combining deep regulatory and customs cooperation, underpinned by provisions ensuring a level playing field for open and fair competition.
B. Tariffs.
The economic partnership should ensure no tariffs, fees, charges or quantitative restrictions across all sectors, with ambitious customs arrangements that, in line with the parties' objectives and principles above, build and improve on the single customs territory provided for in the withdrawal agreement, which obviates the need for checks on rules of origin.
C. Regulatory aspects.
24. While preserving regulatory autonomy, the parties will put in place provisions to promote regulatory approaches that are transparent, efficient, promote avoidance of unnecessary barriers to trade in goods, and are compatible to the extent possible. Disciplines on technical barriers to trade, TBT, and sanitary and phytosanitary measures, SPS, should build on and go beyond the respective WTO agreements. Specifically, the TBT disciplines should set out common principles in the fields of standardization, technical regulations, conformity assessment, accreditation, market surveillance, metrology and labeling. The parties should treat one another as single entities as regards SPS measures, including for certification purposes, and recognize regionalization on the basis of appropriate epidemiological information provided by the exporting party. The parties will also explore the possibility of cooperation of United Kingdom authorities with Union agencies such as the European Medicines Agency, EMA, the European Chemicals Agency, ECHA, and the European Aviation Safety Agency, ESA. 25. In this context, the United Kingdom will consider aligning with Union rules in relevant areas.
D. Customs.
26. The parties will put in place ambitious customs arrangements in pursuit of their overall objectives. In doing so, the parties envisage making use of all available facilitative arrangements and technologies in full respect of their legal orders, and ensuring that customs authorities are able to protect the parties' respective financial interests and enforce public policies. To this end, they intend to consider mutual recognition of trusted traders programs, administrative cooperation in customs matters and mutual assistance, including for the recovery of claims related to taxes and duties, and through the exchange of information to combat customs fraud and other illegal activity. 27. Such facilitative arrangements and technologies will also be considered in developing any alternative arrangements for ensuring the absence of a hard border on the island of Ireland on a permanent footing.
E. Implications for checks and controls.
28. The parties envisage that the extent of the United Kingdom's commitments on customs and regulatory cooperation, including with regard to alignment of rules, would be taken into account in the application of related checks and controls, considering this as a factor in reducing risk. This, combined with the use of all available facilitative arrangements as described above, can lead to a spectrum of different outcomes for administrative processes as well as checks and controls, and note in this context their wish to be as ambitious as possible, while respecting the integrity of their respective markets and legal orders.
3. Services and investment. A. Objectives and principles.
29. The parties should conclude ambitious, comprehensive and balanced arrangements on trade in services and investment in services and non-services sectors, respecting each party's right to regulate. The parties should aim to deliver a level of liberalization in trade in services well beyond the parties' World Trade Organization, WTO, commitments and building on recent Union Free Trade Agreements, FTAs. 30. In line with Article 5 of the General Agreement on Trade in Services, the parties should aim at substantial sectoral coverage, covering all modes of supply and providing for the absence of substantially all discrimination in the covered sectors, with exceptions and limitations as appropriate. The arrangements should therefore cover sectors including professional and business services, telecommunications services, courier and postal services, distribution services, environmental services, financial services, transport services and other services of mutual interest.
B. Market access and non-discrimination.
31. The arrangements should include provisions on market access and national treatment under host state rules for the party service providers and investors, as well as address performance requirements imposed on investors. This would ensure that the party services providers and investors are treated in a non-discriminatory manner, including with regard to establishment. 32. The arrangements should allow for the temporary entry and stay of natural persons for business purposes in defined areas.
C. Regulatory aspects.
33. While preserving regulatory autonomy, the arrangements should include provisions to promote regulatory approaches that are transparent, efficient, compatible to the extent possible, and which promote avoidance of unnecessary regulatory requirements. 34. In this context, the parties should agree disciplines on domestic regulation. These should include horizontal provisions such as licensing procedures, and specific regulatory provisions in sectors of mutual interest such as telecommunication services, financial services, delivery services, and international maritime transport services. There should also be provisions on the development and adoption of domestic regulation that reflect good regulatory practices. 35. In this context, the parties should establish a framework for voluntary regulatory cooperation in areas of mutual interest, including exchange of information and sharing of best practice. 36. The parties should also develop appropriate arrangements on those professional qualifications which are necessary to the pursuit of regulated professions, wherein the parties' mutual interest